campus of Southern Miss today in Hattiesburg. We have dined.
We have.
Kind of together.
Yeah.
At lunchtime today. Had a great
like
burger.
Ships in the night.
And had a great conversation with Will Hall. Now we are privileged to be joined by Jeremy McClain, the athletics director here at Southern Miss. Great to see you.
You guys as well. I'm excited you guys are here on campus, man. I'm excited to have you in Hattiesburg.
It's been a good day, and obviously an incredible thing that's going on with CAST and Children's Advocacy Centers of Mississippi and the awareness that is being generated for that great work.
Yeah, great reason to be here for sure.
No doubt. The summer is short or seems to get shorter. I'm not sure that there is any time off. I mean, maybe you find a little time for a vacation or a long weekend or something like that. But in terms of downtime, that idea of the summer slowing down in college athletics is kind of a thing of the past.
Yeah, that's days gone by. So we're in 12-month-a-year cycle, which is fine, and we've been that way for a while. But I think with some of the newness that is headed our way, that's changed even more. I have to kind of, I said this jokingly to someone. They were asking me about some things that were happening on the national level. I wake up every morning and read the news just like everyone else to see what's happening, and it's ever changing. So for us, it really is about trying to stay in front of things, and it is summertime is kind of non-existent now, and it's the world we live in.
You said that word there. I had Zach Selman on my show a couple weeks ago, and I asked him this question. Do you ever get tired of the phrase, the ever-changing landscape of college football?
I would like for that to go away, yes.
Can we just get one month where everything stays the same?
I would be okay to just say this. We've been in rhythm here for a while, but, I'm not sure when that's going to happen.
Yeah.
There are a lot of issues that are grabbing news cycles in college athletics in terms of importance to you, importance to Southern Miss. How do you kind of rank those things that are very much in the news? What's at the if there's a to-do list, what's number one, number two, number three?
Yeah, great question. And we certainly prioritize those things, but to go back to what we were just saying, I'm not sure you ever get to go, let me pick this thing and try to find a solution because of all the things that are happening. But if I were to have to, give a priority list of things, at the top of that list right now for us would be what's happening with the House case and from a scholarship standpoint.
Yeah.
Because I think that is a real significant landscape change, and that's not finalized yet. We still have work to get there, but we feel like that's coming. And so that's a real change that is kind of foundational change to what we do. And contrary to popular belief, there's not the revenue sources in college athletics are not unlimited. There's some institutions certainly that have a whole lot more access to it than the rest of us, but so we're going to have to make some really, really difficult decisions on prioritizing things within our departments, how we go about doing our business to try to address the scholarship pieces that are heading our way. So I would say if you were to ask me what kept me up at night right now, it would be thinking about how we tackle that.
Nobody's got a money tree in the backyard, but it does feel like there are a few oil derricks in some people's backyards that contrary to popular belief, because of you. So when we talk about that, I mean, some pretty drastic changes on that scholarship front with the House settlement. Obviously, revenue sharing is part of that, but I'm glad you focused on that piece of it. If it goes through as proposed, a scholarship limit at the Division I level that could go to 105 for football. Baseball, which matters so very much here, could go to 11.7 to 34. But then walk-ons, those are also roster caps.
That's right.
So it's you can give up to this many scholarships, but you can't have anybody beyond that. So I feel like sometimes the idea of, okay, we've got to fund NIL or we've got to do this or we've got to do that, people think about that in terms of dollars and cents, but don't necessarily equate scholarships in exactly the same way.
Yeah.
Is that a reasonable?
I think that is spot on. I don't think people sit back and go, okay, 20 scholarships means $500,000, right? And so, but it does. It's real money. It's things we have to allocate for in our budget. We have to find the money to pay for scholarships. And so I use that number because baseball, we're looking at a 22, that's about 22 scholarships more than what we've been functioning off of. And so for us to, and you said it, baseball is very important here in Hattiesburg and on our campus. And so to be able to compete where the way we want to be able to compete and the way we've been able to compete, we've got to find the answer to that question. And so not only does that mean 22 scholarships for baseball, but you also have to take into account what the ripple effect of that is. Title IX, for example. So if 22 male scholarships are added to our bottom line, we certainly have to have at least 22 female opportunities as well. And so for us, it's not a simple, straightforward answer, but it is something it's at the top of our list and something we're trying to tackle. And you mentioned the roster limit. I mean, I would just tell you that 34 spots on a baseball roster is probably not enough. I think if you ask baseball coaches, that's cutting it pretty thin.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to kind of find this balance of, and I think football coaches would say the same with 105. So we're all trying to kind of find this balance. And what's maybe frustrating about the whole thing is that we're trying to find this balance because that's being dictated to us in the courtroom. And that's probably the most frustrating part of all this. And not because it's happening, not because we're getting more opportunities for student athletes, but because as an organization, we didn't do enough when we should have to adapt and adjust, that now we're being forced to do this and trying to play catch up, which really is creating a very difficult situation.
And I feel like the crazy part of that, or maybe the most disappointing part of that, is there were people in college athletics who looked at them and was like, hey, this is coming. But in terms of at the leadership level, the people in charge at the NCAA were like, no, we're going to fight this, and spent untold tens of millions of dollars fighting what most people looked at as a losing battle from the outset.
That's right. And I think and I want not to get too deep in the weeds on this, but I think the organizational structure was just kind of archaic. I think we were not set up in a way to adapt and adjust and make decisions we needed to make. And part of that is just a structure between, the ability of athletic directors to make movement and change and decisions, and the ability of presidents to do that. And sometimes presidents on campuses have a lot on their plates, and they're not nearly as well versed, in college athletics as your athletic directors are. And so I just use that as an example. There's a lot of other examples within the system or the organization over the years that prevented us from, I think, it's kind of like that, the turning the cruise liner, right? I mean, you just can't get it turned quickly enough. You can't get to the point you want to get to do the things that are necessary to avoid some of these things.
I'm going to ask you this now before we're right up against the break.
Yep.
You got time to hang for another
Absolutely,
segment?
yeah.
Okay. Go ahead, Ed. Sorry.
Well, we were talking to Will Hall a little earlier, and his thoughts on a possible breakaway in Power 5, Group of 6, whatever you want to call it. I guess it's Power 4 now. Are you and your head coach, are you all on the same page there? Do you see that coming down the road? And where does Southern Mississippi fit into that?
Yeah, I think he and I talk a lot about making sure we're prepared to position ourselves the right way, certainly. I don't think there's this imminent breakaway. Do I think over the course of a decade or so we'll see changes where certain institutions begin to separate themselves? That's already happening. But a formal breakaway, I don't think that's in the cards for the next 5, 6, 8, 10 years, especially if the House piece goes through, because that's going to be about a decade-long situation where that's going to be locked in. And so I think for us, we really want to focus on the new playoff system, the opportunity, especially in our league, we've been one of the best group of 5 football leagues in the country, to get our champion into that college football playoff. That's really important to us right now. I think to have the access and be in a position to do that is something we haven't had. And so I don't want to be dismissive of that great opportunity, but I certainly think we'd be foolish not to think that down the road somewhere there's going to be some continued change and maybe separation in some ways.
I feel like everybody has felt the same way for a long time, and there's almost been like begrudging recognition of the fact that football drives everything. Most places. There are a few exceptions. Is that the case for you in this department? How badly do you need football to be a leader in terms of success on the field?
Yeah, the answer is yes. Certainly 100% drives. And it's not just about revenue. That's a huge piece of it. But I think when you're successful in football, there's this level of momentum that just takes place on your campus, and it's not just athletics. I think there's a ripple effect that impacts a lot of things. Recruiting. I just think it's hard to really put a number. Although people have tried, it's hard to put a number on what football success can bring to a college campus, especially in our part of the world.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we need to be successful in football, and we certainly, not something we'll not talk about it, all the time. He knows that. I know that. And so we're doing the things we feel like we have to do to try to get it right to be successful long term. And but that time is now. It's time for us to take that next step, get over the hill, if you will, and create some opportunities for us to be successful.
And when you say recruiting, you're not just talking about football recruiting.
No.
You're talking about student
Absolutely.
recruiting. And probably the two best case stories of the last 2 decades are Dabo Swinney and the success that Clemson's had and the way they've grown and what Alabama and Nick Saban did.
Long list of examples of that happening in a lot of different places.
Here from the 662, I'm a retired high school baseball coach from Northeast Mississippi. It was always frustrating when we played Holka. And might have a better team overall, but they had Jeremy McClain, and we were about to get beat 2-0 every time. Great high school and college pitcher.
Yeah, I got to tell my mom to stop texting in like that.
Yeah. So we talk about listeners to the show, and I was like, well, my mom listens like 3 days a week. It's like if I could get her on all 5 days, it's like we really could sustain some listening numbers on here. Jeremy McClain, athletics director at Southern Miss, visiting with us on an array of topics. We were just talking about the importance of football. It matters so much, and there's such a rich history here, and yet the landscape shifted, and there are all kinds of new challenges. It's hard, but you just kind of have to figure out a way, right?
Yeah, you do, and you're right. I mean, all that's true. Well, great history of success here. It's different today than it was 30 years ago, certainly. I mean, all of those are our realities, but none of that really matters. It's about producing. It's about results, and so for us, it's certainly about last year we felt like the year before we felt like we headed in the right direction, made it back to bowl game. We're making really good progress, and we stumbled last year, and so really did a lot of reflecting at the end of the year and moving into the off season. I think Will's done a great job of addressing what needed to be addressed. He's done a fantastic job in recruiting. Really like his staff, and so we're excited. We're optimistic about what the season holds. But you're exactly right. It's this is a place where it really matters. Success in football, it means a lot to this community. It means a lot to this institution. It means a lot to our fans and alums, and so we take that very seriously, and we're working hard every day to try to get that right and really build a program that can be one that contends for a championship in the Sun Belt consistently. And the Sun Belt is a really good football league, and we're thrilled to be in a really good football league. Of course, when you're trying to rebuild, that creates some challenges.
Yeah.
But we feel like we're positioned well. We feel excited about what this fall looks like for us, and the fact that we're associated with a really good league with an opportunity, as we talked about earlier, to be that Group of 5 champion and can potentially get into a playoff. I think all those things are positives and things that we're really kind of embracing and working towards putting ourselves in the right position.
So we tried to talk to you about the Sun Belt before you could talk about it. We talked to you about it when you were able to talk about it, and we talked about it when it became official. I think we all agreed that the Sun Belt was the right move. When you look across the landscape of the Sun Belt Conference, what is the institution that you think is most similar to Southern Miss, the situation that you're in, kind of when you factor in everything?
Yeah, really good question. And it probably depends on kind of what parameters you're talking about. But I think the institution probably looks like us the most, has some of the same challenges, maybe, profile institutionally, size-wise at least, is probably Louisiana. I think they are a program that, has been really good at baseball. They've had football success. They've had these spots throughout their history have been really successful, and I think institutionally they look a lot like us. Communities are similar, and so when I think about that, I think they're the one that comes to mind as far as kind of and we really have started to create a really good rivalry with them, which has been a lot of fun, and it's part of the reason we were so attracted to the Sun Belt is we didn't have that previously, and so the Sun Belt's allowed us to create that with Louisiana and South Alabama and Troy and and so those things have really excited our fan base, have kind of rejuvenated some interest and awareness in various sports, and the move overall has been a really positive one for us. And you can look at last year's numbers. If you really dive into it for the Sun Belt, and I'm going to miss a sport, but like in volleyball, we had 4 teams get into the NCAA tournament. In football, we had 12 bowl teams, and in Baseball, we had 4 teams getting in the tournament. Softball, we had 3 or 4 teams. Men's soccer, we had teams going to the Final Four and competing for a national championship. And women's soccer, we had multiple teams. So the Sun Belt as a league across the board is really, really competitive on a national level, not just when we talk about Group of 5 in football, but as far as getting teams into the postseason and be able to compete at that level, we're in a really good spot. And so we're thankful to be associated with Sun Belt, to be proud members, and look forward to where the league is headed.
So when I think about the Sun Belt now, and kind of in this ranking system that people have had with conferences, right? Whether it was Power 5, Group of 5, and all of this. And it was almost like the American was maybe a step ahead of Sun Belt, Conference USA, Mountain West, Big West, not Big West, but you get the idea. Yeah. With the changes that have had in the American, it feels to me like the Sun Belt is absolutely on equal footing, if maybe not a step ahead of those other conferences. Do you see it that way?
I do, and I think the numbers would bear that out. I mean,
with some of what you were just talking about.
If you look at the numbers, and even if we're just talking about football, if you look at the computer numbers and the bowl teams and all those things from last year, I think we're there. I think I was in the Sun Belt. I was the athletic director at Troy from 2015 to 2019. So I got to see a different version of the Sun Belt, a Sun Belt that was headed in the right direction but still had a lot of work to do.
Right.
And so in a 10-year period or less, there is it's kind of been these huge leaps competitively. And I think it's a combination. There's a combination of reasons for that. But I think part of that has been the stability of the league and being able to add some quality members when the time was right. But they haven't lost a lot of members. They really have kind of maintained membership, beyond the folks that the 4 of us that came in a couple of years ago. And so I think the league has really, to your point, bypassed some other leagues, so to speak, and really put ourselves in a really good spot. And you got to earn it every year, but I feel really good about where we are.
When you look at where Southern Miss is from a national point, I was just, it popped into my head. You'll have to forgive me, but the idea of a 10-2 USM wins the Sun Belt and goes to Oxford for the first round of the college football playoff, it would be one of the greatest moments in this state's history. When you talk about potentially being a playoff team from USM, where does Southern Miss have to be from a record standpoint? Where do they have? Yeah. Where do they have? Is it? Do you look at that schedule and go, we need to be undefeated, we need to be 11-1?
I think we're probably, it depends on, none of it happens in a vacuum, so it depends on what happens around you. But I think you need to be an 11-1, 10-2 team. And I think you can be 10-2 in our league because of the strength of the league. We look at teams like Tulane or UCF, or some of the years. Of course, they went undefeated one year, but some of the years they were in the mix. It was a 1-loss, 2-loss situation.
And they would have been in the playoff in a 12.
That's right. And so I think that's what you're looking at. I think you're looking at a 10-2, 11-1 kind of year where you're obviously winning the championship, and I guess you would play a conference championship, so you'd add another game to that number. So yeah, but I think that's kind of how I view it. That's where we have to get to is to be a 10-win or more. Type of program, and I think certainly we feel like that's doable, and it's not easy, but if you can do that in our league, I think you're going to have a great opportunity to be playing on the road somewhere in a playoff.
You've mentioned a couple of times that you and Will Hall talk a lot, and whether it's about the landscape of college athletics or college football or Southern Miss or recruiting or staff or what are those things, you obviously let him do his job in terms of building staff and recruiting philosophy. But how involved are you, the two of you, kind of together in shaping what that looks like for their staff? Or are you there as a sounding board and to listen and to occasionally have to say no? How does that work?
All the above. I mean, he and I, we have open relationships from a standpoint of just he knows he can come into my office and ask whatever's on his mind, and I know the same is true. If we need to have a conversation, where I can walk across the hall and have that conversation. And so, but a lot of times it's really about trying to remove roadblocks. Right, so anytime you're trying to help a coach be successful, it's about removing roadblocks when you can. And so to your point, sometimes there are no's. Hey, we're not going to be able to do that right now, or we need to find a different way to do it. And we have the kind of relationship that's we just move on. I mean, we address it and we move on. And but we certainly try to help him every chance we get from a staff standpoint. But he and I do talk about what do we need to do to get better. And a lot of times I may ask questions that I don't really know the answers to, but it's really about trying to let him, as you said, being a sounding board, letting him express and verbalize the things that are important to him and think through some things. And I think that's with any coach. I think you have to be able to do that. And sometimes just maybe it's more important to know what questions to ask than to have the answers.
Last thing for you. NIL. There's been Will Hall's talked about the fact that people have been very supportive,
Yep.
and that is an ongoing, never stops quest for revenue. How is that going?
It's good. We feel like we're in a really good spot. We talk about the Sun Belt and our peers. We feel like as we kind of look around the league, we feel like we've positioned ourselves well. We have, Peter Boehm runs our collective full time. It's what he's doing every day, getting up and getting after it. And we have a great relationship there with the collective. And certainly some of the changes in the laws have allowed us to talk more and more. But that's been really good. Folks have responded well. I think people realize it's really important to our success, especially over the next few years.
Yeah.
We don't know what the rules are going to be 5-6 years from now. But in the short term, this is something we have to tackle. And our folks have responded really well to that.
Really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Appreciate you guys having me on. It's always great to visit.